right, we're here to talk about SSIS and how developers can use it. Okay, so that wasn't what you came for. Well, hang out anyway, you might learn something. Or if you decide you're not getting anything out, you are free to leave. You know, you spent your hard-earned money to be here. Want to make sure you get a lot out of it. I'm glad we have 70-minute sessions because we do have a lot to cover. But, you know, if you have a question, just holler out. Got to mention our sponsors real quick. RecruitWise, they're the main sponsor of the show, have been for a couple of years. Great folks. They helped out. You saw probably some at the check-in desk. And they do a lot of recruiting work. And then the fine folks at DevExpress, I love some of their controls. I won't program without CodeRush. If you're not using it, you should be. Who uses CodeRush? She gets the books, and she's the only one to raise her hand. Likes my favorite tool. And it is a DevExpress book. All right. Okay, you got the book with our DevExpress book. I'm just recording so Mike can pick me up. Okay, and that's it for those slides. Let's do that one. Okay. I should give a quick plug, SSIS for developers. My company sponsored me to come here, ComFrame. We're a consulting firm. We've got offices in Nashville, Birmingham, and Beijing. We do a lot of global delivery work all over the country. And I work for them as a senior business intelligence architect. I'm also a Microsoft MVP. I've done work for NASA, for a nuclear power company, for banks, just kind of all over the place. Worked with a wide range of applications over the years, although for the last 5-6 years I've been doing nothing but mostly business intelligence work. The slide decks and sample code are up through my blog, arcanecode.com. So, you know, if you write that down, you'll be in good shape, and you'll be able to download everything I'm going to show you today. It's already up there. Eventually, it'll make it to Code Stock site as well, but you know, I'm sure when you leave here, you're going to be rushing home to play with this stuff. I just know it. So, yeah, you can go ahead and get it today. I'm also pretty active on Twitter. All right, so let's talk. What is SSIS? Well, SQL Server Integration Services is a tool for pulling data from one place, transforming it, and then putting it somewhere else. Now, typically, when we look at SSIS, traditionally we think about it in terms of going from one database to another. But it's got a lot more uses besides that. We can pull things from a flat file to a database, from a database to a flat file, from a flat file to a flat file. And, you know, when I say flat file, I can mean any kind of like text file, Excel file. We can pull out of from even Access, which is not really a database, but it's not really a flat file either. I like Brent Ozar's quote, if you snicker every time you hear the word somebody says access database, you must be a DBA. Now, just speaking of which, how many folks in the room are serving like a DBA or a SQL Server type capacity? 2 or 3? Cool. And the rest of you guys all developers? All right. Well, when we think of SSIS, if you were in my session this morning, most commonly we think about it in terms of data warehousing and business intelligence. And it does excel as a tool for getting data into your data warehouse. But as developers, I think SSIS has a lot of utility. Okay? How many of you guys have been on a system where you got to convert data, you're installing the spiffy, wonderful new system you've written, and then you've got the headache of, oh, we need you to convert all the data in the old system to the new system. Okay, I'm sure everybody's been there. Everybody's heads are nodding up and down. You know, this is a great tool to do it with. You can do it fairly fast, fairly efficiently, and save yourself from writing reams and reams of, you know, .NET code. You're sitting around the office, you're working diligently on some fascinating thing when that guy walks into the office. You all know him, that guy. He's the one that's coming around every week wanting you to pull data out of some system that he uses a lot, and give it to him in an Excel file or a flat file. And, because he's golfing buddies with the IT manager, you have to drop everything you're doing to go out and figure out some way to get this data out, put it in a format, and give it to him. Well, SSIS can be a great tool to do this with, because you can even set it up to automatically dump this data out at some point on the database, and boom, at some point on the network, and he can still get that file, weekly or whatever, and you don't have to be bothered. Massive data processing. Okay, when we try to work with data, what does it require? Well, we pull data from the source to whatever computer we're working on. Now that may be your local Windows box, it may be a Windows server somewhere, but it's typically a box other than where the data is. And then, after you process that data, you turn around and have to shove it back down the wire to the box. Well, SSIS can be a great solution for that, because it all runs on the same box. So, you think, okay, hey, that's pretty cool. I could look into SSIS. How do I get it? Well, it comes with every version of SQL Server Standard and SQL Enterprise. And it comes with something you probably already have, SQL Server Developer Edition. Okay? Most of you, if you've got some kind of, even the most basic MSDN license, if you've got, Visual Studio of any kind, you've got SQL Server Developer Edition. You can install it locally on your box, and then you've got SSIS. And even if your company doesn't have SSIS installed on the server, you can still use it to accomplish some basic tasks during your software development. Oops. For some reason, I exited out. That was unusual. Let's see. Hey, Joy. There we go. There we go. Maybe that'll work now. All right, back on track. For some reason, the screen went wonky. As languages go, SSIS is pretty full-featured. Okay, you can actually declare variables and use them. It's got debugging support built in. You can log all the operations to a variety of places, to XML, to a SQL database, which is what's most commonly done. You can log it to a text file. So you got a lot of logging operations that are included. You can also use configurations so that you can use the same SSIS, they call them packages. The package is the basic unit of work, and you can use that same package on multiple databases. They could even have different names, but you control all of that through configurations. It also includes error handling, fairly decent error handling actually. You can write T-SQL scripts that you can execute from within the packages, or if you really need to, you can actually write either VB.NET or C# code. How many are still only on 2005? Okay, you 2005 folks, you only get VB.NET. Everybody else gets C#. So 2008 and beyond gets C#. I've actually had to use this, once or twice. I had a need to decrypt some data we were reading in. And, I just opened up the script component that I'll show you in a little bit, and I accessed the system.cryptography libraries that are part of the .NET framework and used those to decrypt the data I needed. Just wrote me a little bit of VB code. It worked really well. It was a simple, elegant solution, and it solved the problem, and I didn't have to go spend a lot of money on some, third-party software. Now, there's two basic things to understand about the way SSIS works. SSIS starts with something called a control flow. Control flow is kind of like the orchestrator in that it issues commands to say, do this, do that. It coordinates all the tasks needed to get something done. What you got to remember, though, is that the control flow itself does not operate on individual rows of data. It can operate on sets of data. For example, you could issue a SQL command that says, update table 1 set date equal to new date, and it will go update, that particular table. Or it can kick off things like the data flow task, and that data flow task does indeed operate on a row-by-row basis. It's, typical flow is you read from a data source, you then transform that data somehow, and then finally you put it out to a data destination of some kind. Again, data sources and data destinations, wide open. Could be databases, but might not be. Could be flat files. So, enough of all that. I'm going to show you some code now, because that's what you really want to see. I mean, I know you guys, if you're like me, forget all these slides, show me some code. So, let's go take a look. Let's start with looking at some of the basic tenets around SSIS and what you see in the environment. So you kick off an SSIS project by doing File, New Project, and then you'll see Business Intelligence Projects. Okay, and under here you can do Integration Services Project, okay, which is how I generated this current project you're looking at. And you give it all the standard stuff, and it will create an empty package for you. And when we start looking at things, the first thing you're going to notice is this tab here that says, okay, I'm in the control flow, which is what I mentioned a second ago. And through the control flow, we can orchestrate the various things we need to do. I'm going to point out some of the various tools over here, just kind of give you an overview of some of the ones you'll use the most. I'm not going to go over every one of them, and we're just going to hit these real quick because of time. But you can actually execute loops by having loop containers. You can do a sequence container so that you force the order something goes in. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can use ActiveX tasks. A bulk insert task will allow you to bulk import data and put it somewhere. Kind of like there's like a bulk copy utility that's built in the SQL Server, and this is basically a wrapper for it. The data flow task is the one you'll use every time because that's where you operate on a row-by-row level. Let's see. How many of you come from the SQL 2000 days and are familiar with DTS? Wow, okay, lots of you. Well, if you still have DTS tasks sitting on your 2000 box, you can actually execute them from SSIS. SSIS was basically a complete rewrite of DTS. And as you might expect, the marketing guys changed the name of it at the last minute. So even though the box says SSIS, when you start digging into it to actually work with some of the code objects, it still says DTS on it. Like if you want to log something from within VB script, it's DTS.log, and DTS is the object you work with. So, a little history lesson when you see that. Just like you can execute the old DTS packages, you can also execute other packages. And that's actually extremely common. If you have more than one package, typically what you do is you set up something called a master package, which is just like any other package, but all it does is execute the individual packages you're running. Okay. I mentioned execute SQL task. That's where you, and let me show you an example of one of these. Drop it on the form, right click, and you can go to edit, and this is how you get to all the stuff you want to do. In an execute SQL task, I would set up a connection type and a connection string. So I go to, whatever my database is, and then I can just type in a SQL statement here. Select, or say update, blah, blah, blah. A very common one is delete star from staging. You've got a staging table or some kind of temp table you set up. You could also pull that thing you want, the code you want to run from a file, or you could have that code stored in a variable. Okay. Cancel that. We'll just get rid of that. Oh, hey, yeah, I'm sure. A file system task is essentially you're issuing some sort of command to the, just like if you open up a command window and typed in, CD system 32 del asterisk dot asterisk, that's the kind of thing you could do. This is most commonly used for, you have pulled a file from somewhere on the network and you want to, say, rename the old file to the .bak and then copy over the new file, something like that. FTP, very common scenario. You've got a job that needs to pull data in from some customer, so you can FTP that data in and then process that data into your database. Or the reverse, you've produced data and now you've got to FTP that data to the customer site. Script task I already mentioned. That's where you do the VB.NET or C# code. Let's see. I think that's about the most useful ones. There's all sorts of stuff with web services that you can do. So in this simple example, I have a single data flow task. Okay? And in that data flow task, what we're challenged to do is grab some data out of AdventureWorks and put them to a CSV file. Because that guy has come back yet again wanting more sales data. Okay? So when I double click on this, you see I'm taken to the data flow. On the data flow tab is where we orchestrate the movement of individual rows. Okay? In a typical scenario, we read a row, write a row, read a row, write a row. Okay? So, but there are some circumstances where we won't do that, and I'll explain those in a minute. But I want to show you a few things from our toolbox over here. The first is the sources. Okay, we've got a variety of sources we can pull from: ADO.NET, Excel, flat files, LADB, XML. I'll mention the raw file source just briefly because it kind of gets confusing to some people. What SSIS will let you do is stage your data somewhere. So you can have package 1 that runs and it puts its data out to a raw file source. Then you can go do some other stuff and then run package 2, which picks up that raw file and finish processing it. So it's just a special binary source that's only usable by SSIS. Okay? So over here, I have set up my source. And when I double click on it, I say, first of all, what is my connection manager? Well, it's this AdventureWorks 2008. Where did that come from? Okay. So let's go take a look at how we would set up a shared connection. Because if you see over here, I've got 3 separate packages that run. Okay. All 3 of them share these connections up here. Okay. When we set up a shared connection, that means when I go to configure this package to run on multiple servers, I only have to change the connection string for my shared item to go point it to all my different boxes in my server cluster. I don't have to change it for each individual package. And I had a situation where I had 400 packages, okay, that I had to coordinate. Oop. Hey, I said my prescription's in at the pharmacy. Anyway, so let's look at setting up one of those. To do that, you right-click and say New Data Source. Okay? And then it walks you through the New Data Source wizard. You can pick data connections, you type New, and it brings you through some fairly common, I'm sure you've all seen this connection manager dialog 1,000 times. It's pretty common where you just pick the name of the server, what database you want to connect to, and then save it. I'll show you one that's already created. Once it's saved, I can come in here and edit it later. Here's the data source name that I gave it. Here's my connection string. And if I test the connection, we'll see that it's succeeded. The database I'm going to be using for the source is AdventureWorks 2008. I'm sure nobody's ever seen AdventureWorks before, but, anyway, let's So once I have that here in the shared area, I need to come here and add it to the connection managers for this package. Okay, and that's where these sit down here. Now I could have actually created a direct connection to the AdventureWorks that would only live within this package. Okay, but then it's harder to reuse. Okay, so once I have it declared as a shared data source up here, I then have to tell this package, use that data source. And I do that by right-clicking, and you could see I could create a new connection, but what I want to do is new connection from data source, and then I pick the existing available data sources and pick OK, and it would add it to this area down here. Okay, and you can see I actually did that with the file output data source. Okay, so, and I deliberately set it up as a non-shared data source so that you could see that it only exists down here and not in the shared data sources. Okay, so I have two very simple input and output. Okay, I used the OLADB source, and when I open it up, you can either double click or right click and hit edit. You can see what I have is the connection, and I could have picked from a table or view or a SQL command from a variable, but here I just put it right here in the text. And then if I go to columns, you can see here are all the columns I've picked. Okay. Now, what this can be useful is if you're actually gone from a table, you could actually have unchecked a few of these and not brought in every single column. Or if I decided I wanted to, maybe I wanted to rename order date to ORDERDATE. Okay, so I can make things a little clearer. Okay, so if I change it in the output column, it'll change it in the rest of the package for me. Give me a nice way to work with this. Then, see this? This is called, this little green arrow is called a precedence operator. And all that means is, first I do this, then I do this. Okay? And I can actually add constraints on here so that I can say, well, gee, if something fails, do this. All sorts of, you can see what data is flowing through here. I can add what they call data viewers for debugging. I won't take time to do any of that right now because of time. But finally, we're going to hit our output. You can see our output sources down here. And you can see I've got a few more output things. I've got ADO.NET, data readers, dimensional processing if you're dealing a lot with data warehousing, Excel, OLADB, flat files, raw files. So you can see there's quite a few items down here to pick from. And this is actually just the flat file editor itself is actually pretty simple. It just says, here's where I'm going, and here's the mapping. This is the input column, and this is the destination column it's going to. Okay, so if I cancel that, you actually will want to see how this is defined. When I created this, hard drive's worn away here. Here we go. You can see I defined the flat file connection manager and said, okay, well, where's it going to go? Well, I'm going to output the file to this folder, okay, and it's going to be named salesOutput.csv. And if I actually go to that folder, you can see I do not have that file existing out here, okay. So just to show you there's no smoke and mirrors going on. I can actually specify what format this file is going to be. It's going to be a delimited. I could have said it's going to be fixed width or maybe ragged right. I can totally pick the text qualifier, header row, number of header rows to skip. When I come in here to the columns, it's been able to take that input data and kind of mock up what this stuff's going to look like. And I can actually specify a row delimiter and a column delimiter. So I could have used commas, I could use semicolons, a tab, vertical bar, or I can actually type something in here if I want to. Okay, so I can type my own special character. And I actually had to do that one time. I had a customer who wanted to use the little, they call it a carré, the shifted number 6. He wanted that as a columns. They had some kind of weird, funky software package they had bought, and that's what they needed. That's what they get for not writing their own stuff in Visual Studio. So, If we look at the Advanced tab, we can actually, this is where we actually come to define the columns we're going to output. And you can see, I can give it a name, column delimiter, tell it what data type I expect to put out, how wide is it going to be, and do I want to qualify the text. Okay, there's the postal code, order date. I don't have a good numerical value in here, but I can even go so far as to preview and see what it's going to look like. Of course, this isn't the real data, but you kind of get the idea. So, when I'm ready, I can actually run this right from within Visual Studio. I can click on the Run. And I can actually see the progress as this thing kicks off. It's read 31,000 rows. Okay. Now let's come back here and we'll do a refresh. And I should have had it out here. Let me double check my path. Oh. To stop this, you can either click here or you can click on the traditional stop in the debugger. Okay? But the package continues in that kind of halted state so that you can explore what its values are right now. I'll go ahead and show you this while we're here. I can actually come in here to this Progress tab and I can actually see its execution progress, percent complete, see how long the thing takes. You can see it actually took 0.93 seconds to run. Okay, so using this, you can start doing things like performance tuning. You know, well, I wonder if this would run faster or that would run faster. Do it both ways and see. But I'm going to stop this just so I can check to see where it's actually output to. We'll just copy this out. And it should be oh, there it is. Put it in the solution file. Helps if I go to the right directory. If I open this up in Excel, you'll now see, here's my data. Okay, and there's all the data that just came out of our database. Now, can you imagine if you had to do this on a weekly basis for somebody, how convenient it would be to just be able to fire off this job and have that data output? And even more convenient would be to actually run this on the server and then have it pull that data back and, you know, have it just automatically puts it out there on the network for them. Okay, very, very cool. Yes?
If you ran that on the server and the target was an Excel file, do you have to have a copy of the Excel server, or will it create an Excel extension file with all the Excel attributes, but not being forced to open a spreadsheet to drop it into?
You do not have to have Excel on the server. In this case, it was a CSV file I created, but you don't. Yeah, if you don't have to have Excel on the server, there is a caveat that if you're running on a 64-bit server with 64-bit SQL Server, there's a switch you have to flip that tells SSIS run in 32-bit mode so I can create this Excel file. Okay, I forget exactly where it's at. I can do a blog post to put it out there, but it's not too hard. But it doesn't work, and you can't create Excel files right now in 64-bit mode.
Has it the jet driver that it uses or something?
Yeah.
64-bit. Yeah.
So, yes.
I'm running into problems using this where I'm moving text back and forth, and like Sam's marker with an apostrophe or 28 bicycles with a double quote, single double quote in the middle of the string. How do you
that's
those characters and get it to work right?
When you're pulling them out of the database, you mean, or just like from one?
Or moving them from one database to another, or moving them into an Excel sheet.
Well, moving them from one database to another shouldn't be an issue unless you're actually putting in, typing in stuff in SQL to put in there, because SQL Server itself should eliminate all that, delineate all that correctly for you. But going from a text file to another text file, I can see where you might have problems. I'll have to think about that and get back to you, because I don't think...
You pick a different text qualifier.
Yeah, well, that's one way you could do it, is in that output file. That is an obvious thing, is down here under text qualifier right there, you could pick some kind of different text qualifier to work with. Okay.
Okay, well, I mean, I was actually coming from an Access database into a SQL database.
Okay, I'll have to play with that and let you know something.
I gave up and just pre-processed and got rid of all the files.
I know there's a way to handle that. I just don't remember what it is off the top of my head. Because I have done that before, gone from Access and using SSIS. I'll show you another little sample here. Oh, and by the way, as long as I'm in the folder, there's actually a, I call it a lab. These are step-by-step instructions, so you can recreate everything you're seeing here. So when you get home, you can just go through here, copy the examples, and just step through all the packages I've created. And that's up on the Code Gallery site that I've got linked to on my webpage. Okay, back here. Here, we're going to go just a little further. I've got a table in here called mailings, dbo.mailings. And if I come in here now, you can see I've got no data in here. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do the reverse. That CSV file I just created, I'm going to import that data into this table. So, and basically it looks just like the reverse of what we did a minute ago. I've got a script task here, a SQL script task, and what it does is issues a delete command. It says delete dbo.mailings. Okay. May not be what you want to do every time, but maybe your business logic says delete the whole table and then reload it every time. You may want to do extra processing to look for records. Maybe this is a staging table, something like that. But again, this is just for the example. And then I go to the data flow task, and you can see now I have in the source and the mailings destination just like I had before, but I've got this little guy thrown in here. This is what we call a transformation. There's a lot of different transformations we can use. This is a long list of them. I'm going to just point out a very few real quick that are quite common. The first on the list is called an aggregate transformation. Okay, and what it does is it reads through the records and totals them up, and then passes the totals on to the next particular item. So what you could do is say, well, I only want to pull in, the sum total sales by product for the day. Okay, so you've hooked up to your point of sale system, you're importing those rows, and you've got it sorted by day by product. And what this will do is aggregate those values for you and then pass them on to the next item, which, maybe you're staging that data somewhere for a report. Okay. Now, interesting thing, I mentioned earlier that typically a data flow task works on a row-by-row basis. You import a row, you do something with it, you write it out. Well, there's a handful of transformations that are called blocking transformations. A blocking transformation will stop processing at that particular transformation until it has read all the records. And then once it's read all the records, then it will continue processing with the rest of the package. Okay, and that's why they refer to it as a blocking, because it's got to have all of the records read in to do its task. And aggregate's one of them. Conditional splits are pretty interesting. You can actually have two different branches of logic out here. And so I could put a conditional split in here that says, well, if my record is a U.S. record, go to some blocks over here. Otherwise, it must be international, come over here. Okay. Data conversion, you can actually convert from one data type to another. This particular one is a derived column transformation. which is a way to let you do calculations or adjustments, and I'll show you more on that in just a second. Let's see. Lookups are one you use quite a bit, and I'm going to have an example of that in a few minutes, but the lookups allow you to look up some value in another place. Now, that other place could be another database somewhere, could be a flat file, could be just about anything that you can hook up to. So, maybe you're reading in the mailing file and you've got the employee ID out there and you want to go get some information about that employee ID, so you go do a lookup in the HR system to go grab some extra piece of information that you need before you finish writing it out to the mailings file. Merge and merge join are kind of similar in that they can merge two different streams together. A multicast, when you pull it in, you can actually have two different branches of logic, and you can actually send that same row to two different places. One of the things I use this for is history. I am pulling in data from somewhere, and I want to keep one copy of that and insert it into a history table, so I just keep accumulating that, and then the other row I update my current production table with. Okay, so I'm sending the same row to two different branches of logic. A laydb command, you can actually issue a command against the database. This is very slow, so don't use it unless you have to. Percentage sampling, simply as you're reading rows in, you tell it what threshold you want, and it will discard rows and keep a certain percentage of rows. So it knows how many rows you're going to deal with. Maybe you say, I want to do a 10%, and you're reading in 100 rows. It'll throw away 90 of those rows and keep what it considers to be a good random sampling of 10 rows. That can be great for situations where you're supplying data to your developers, and your database may be terabytes in size, and you want to create just a real small version of that database to give to the devs, so they've got some good data over the course of time to work with. The row count does just what it says. It counts rows, but it's kind of interesting in that it can be used for a destination. Okay. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is all packages must have a source and they must have a destination. Those are the two things a package must have so it will run. But, there's times when I'm developing a package. A good example back to that history package I wrote. You pull a record in, you've got two branches of logic, and you'd like to be able to test the update current database before you even write any of the history. Well, a row count can act as a destination. So I stuck a row count out here, and I just, let the records go into the row count how many I'm sending to history, and it served as kind of a temporary destination until I could finish writing the rest of the package. So that's a handy little trick. Script component I mentioned before, you can write .NET code. If you were in my morning session, slowly changing dimensions, this is a task that's specifically designed to work with slowly changing dimensions. And I think that's enough for right now because we're got about a half hour left. Any questions on any of this so far?
On the percentage sampling, if you have relations set between two tables, would it take rows that one depended on?
If those rows come as part of the transformation, as part of the package, it will. But if it's just like a foreign key type relationship, it won't. Okay, so let's do. I've already shown you there's no data in the mailings file, so let's actually execute this. And when I run this, you can see it counts as the rows as it goes by. And when it's green, everything's good. If it's not green, you're in trouble. And now if I come over here and I run this again, you see I've got all of my rows. Of course, this is the top 1,000. Let's back that out and just get all of them. And look how many I have, 31,465. And 31,465. Okay, pretty cool. And you can see that took no time at all to go execute. Okay, 2.278 seconds. Okay, very fast. Stop that executing. I'll show you that this Package Explorer tab can be kind of nice too, to find, if you've got a lot of controls and a lot of data flow, it can be nice to browse your package in this format where I can go look at all the variables, and you can have, there's both system variables and variables you create. Here's all, I don't have any precedence constraints, but I could actually here in the data flow put a constraint in here that says, well, if I didn't read in, here's, very common one. If I don't read any rows in exit the package early, there's no sense in doing the rest of the processing if I haven't read any rows. Okay. Let's see.
Is that is that only data in the data flow, or is that also control flow? One thing I've seen is like where you try to read a file, you don't get a file. So how do you switch?
Well, in the control flow, what you would have to do in the control flow is do like a script task that went out and looked for something, returned a value, and then it said in that precedence constraint, it checks that variable and says, yeah, I can run, or no, I can't. Okay. One of the things we did was we created one data flow task to say, is there any data out here? And it returns that result to a variable. And then in the precedence constraint, we say, oh, there's no data, don't run the next step, just stop running the package. But the reason you want to do that is because if you have a lot of like lookup values and stuff, the first thing SQL Server Integration Services does is it goes and buffers up all that data. Okay, so you still take that impact even if you don't process any rows. Okay.
That's sort of back to my question. I had like process flow where it sort of validates before it actually executes it, and it goes dessert. It validates backwards. Like for example, I'm deleting a table and then filling them up or something like that, and when it goes to that, it goes the other way around. And it fails.
Yeah. A lot of times in those situations, I wind up breaking them into multiple data flows or multiple even packages, so that when it validates, it only validates, you validate the piece works, you do that, then you move on to the next piece that will work and do that. And that way, as it validates, it's handling things correctly because it only has to validate the small pieces at a time. Let's look at this last one. This last one, I'm actually going to do a little bit more. And you can see here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some data in. I'm then going to get various values from other tables before I finally write it out to my mailings. Now, in this particular case, I'm using the same mailings table, so let's just go delete that data. My finger's on the right spot. P-E-L-E. Come on, fingers. Okay, there. Table's gone. Boom, no records. Okay, just show you that it's cleaned out. Now, our control flow is pretty much like the one you saw before. We delete what was there before, and then we migrate that data over, okay, which is our data flow. That's just why I called it migrate. And the first thing we do is we read from the AdventureWorks. And if you remember before, I had a pretty long SQL statement to get that data. Now, I've created a much simpler SQL statement. And you can see I'm returning things like just the customer ID or the ship to address ID or the account number. Okay, so I'm just getting back keys that are referred to other tables. They're foreign keys. Then the first thing I do is say, well, I got that customer ID. I want to go get the customer name from that customer table. So to do that, I'm going to do a lookup. So I double click on the lookup. And when I come here to connection, I have the AdventureWorks and I say select customer ID, person ID from sales.customer, because I have to get the person to go to the person table and get all that guy's information. Okay. Now, over here, you can see is where I actually link, and this is actually where you do the where clause at. Okay. Because before you may have been wondering, well, there's the connection, but how do I say that the customer ID that I'm reading in, how do I link that to this customer ID in the sales table? Well, it's through this. Here's the input columns, and this is all the columns coming into this transformation. And here is the lookup columns in my target table. Okay. Well, what I've said is the customer ID I'm reading in links to the customer ID in the table I'm looking at. And the field I am returning from that table is the person ID. Okay, is everybody with me? Because that's kind of it's not real, I guess, the most intuitive interface, put it like that. But once I have the person ID, I can then go up to the next table, or to the next lookup and say, okay, let's get the business entity, the first name, middle name, last name from the person. And again, I'm doing the same thing. I've got the person ID coming in now, and I link that to the business entity ID, which is the same as the person ID. And I can return the first, middle, and last name. And I do that throughout the rest of this. And even though in this particular example, everything's coming out of AdventureWorks, I could be going off to any data source I want to. And all of these lookups, I could be going to Oracle, I could be going to MySQL, I go to a flat file somewhere, it doesn't matter. Okay, that's what these lookups are really designed to do. Now I'm going into what we call a derived column. Remember, we saw that a second ago. Let's actually look at it this time. And here I'm creating new columns for my data flow. So the first one is full name, and maximize that so you can see it. And here in the full name, I'm actually doing the first name, and I'm using some logic called isNull to get the middle name. And then this is what they call the trinary operator. You've probably seen this before. Essentially it's an if-then statement. So if this part's true, the question mark means then. So if is null, then return nothing, else return the middle name and a space after it. Okay. And then finally I tack on the last name. And the city-state zip's even easier because I can just assemble those together. But this isn't just simple text string manipulation. I've got a full range of mathematical functions available. I've got date-time functions so that I can say, well, you know, when is my next physical year due? And how many days off is that? I can calculate that. I can typecast to other data types in here. And I can even do some pretty interesting operators, you know, as you can see here. Bitwise operations, the whole 9 yards. Okay. I can also choose to replace existing columns with new columns. For example, you know, maybe I had a rule that says if my postal code is, you know, over 5 characters, truncate it to 5 characters. So I could replace the existing zip code with a new text field, also called zip code, and actually would replace an existing column as opposed to adding an existing column. Okay. And then, of course, I've got my required destination. So when I run this, now you're seeing this pop up because down here I've got one of the debugging tools built in, and you can see right here, see this little thing? That is a data viewer. Okay, and what's happened is, as I've processed this, it hit this data viewer and it has stopped processing while I look at the data. Okay, and let's actually embed that in there. And you can dock this or undock it, what have you. But now I can actually have a chance to come in here. I can look at the data that's coming through. I can go, oh, I see my problem. I have a bunch of null purchase orders. And maybe I can go out and do something about that. But this is a way to capture the data as you work your way through it and do things and kind of figure out what's going on.
You mentioned the record counter a while ago as an output.
Mhm.
Can you hook that to the error output of a block and then put a viewer on the error?
Yeah.
I wondered what would be a simple way to view the records that were
Mhm.
rejected.
When I'm ready to keep running, I can click. I can either click this and it will process another batch of rows and wait for me to continue, or if I click detach, it goes ahead and processes the rest of the data. Okay, and you can see here it's finished processing it. Now what he was just referring to was error outputs. These little red lines that are coming out of the various transformations, that is where you can go branch to error handling logic. Okay, so I could connect this to something else that says, oh, if I had an error, go handle that error for me. Okay, one thing might be if I should have found a piece of information but I didn't, I'm going to send that record somewhere else to an error table and then notify the user somehow that, maybe through email or something that says, hey, I had an error, had issues, go fix it. Let me just show you that real quick because we're getting really slack on time and I want to show you this one other thing. If I go to error output, you can see this is, I can tell it fail component naturally. Let's see. And you can say, well, how do I handle rows with no matching entries? Fail component, I can redirect to another row. I can redirect to no match output, which is new to 2008. Okay. If you saw down here, I actually have one green arrow, a second green arrow, and a red arrow. Okay. A lookup in 2008 actually has three outputs it can do. It can have I found a row, this is what I want you to go do, or I didn't find a row. Because actually it can be, one of the things you might want to do is say, go look at the table, and if I don't have the row, go ahead and insert it. If I do have the row, go do something else with it. Okay. Or if I had an error, then I can branch to the error output. In 2005, you had this headache that SSIS interpreted I can't find it as an error. So you actually had to put a lot of code that was actually valid code into the error branch. Okay. So in 2008, they improved things and gave you match, no match, and error. So it's a true error. Okay. And of course, if we come back here, now we're going to have data. As I'm sure is no surprise to you. Any more questions around this? Okay. Now, one of the things I'm sure you're thinking is, well, how can I use this as, something in my projects? How do I write .NET code? How can I use this? Well, let's create, I've got a simple example, and how many of you guys like podcasts? There's a couple. Listen to .NET Rocks maybe? Okay. Well, what I did was I went out and I got a text file of all the episodes of .NET Rocks, okay? And in that file, it's just pretty straightforward. It's just a single line that has show number, title, and then the date that the show came out. So we're going to import that into our system, but then we're going to parse all that out and put it into a table. So the first thing I've done is I've set up a staging table called Staging DNR Shows, and it just has a single column that has what are called show data. It's that line I read in. And then I've got the destination table, which is DNR Shows, which has the show number, show name, and show date. Okay? And just to make sure, oh, no data there, and no data there. Okay? So let's go look at the project. I actually have two projects. I have this is a WinForms application because it was quick and easy to slap together. And all it does, the first part of it does, is it takes that file and shoves it in a SQL Server. Okay? And it just standard code, real simple, open it up, loop through the file, shove the records in there. So let's actually run that part of the file real quick, and we're going to say load DNR data to staging. When I run that, I get data has been loaded, and sure enough, if I come over here, here's my staging. I execute, boom, I've got the data in there now. Okay, now I got to go parse all this stuff out. Well, how could I do that efficiently? Well, one way might be with SSIS. So I've got an SSIS package that is pretty simple. It has the load DNR shows, and what it did was now in this case I just said dump whatever was in that destination file. You may actually do some more different things, but for simplicity I said just delete it, process it, and then delete what was in the staging table. Processing, it's pretty straightforward. I read it in from that source table. I then go through a derived column transformation in which I start grabbing substrings. Okay, and this substring should be pretty simple. If you work with any, substrings, I'm sure is something you guys do all the time in coding if you're like me. So just some simple substring text. And, finally I write it to the destination. Well, gee, this is great, but how do I get it on the server? Okay, I need to get this to the server for it to be any good to me. I don't want to have to sit here and run this package from my computer every time, and you can't give it to a user to install on his PC. It's got to run on a SQL server. So what you do is you go to the build and do the build, and you get build succeeded down here, and then let's see. Here in my project, it creates a bin directory, deployment, and what you're going to see is a manifest file, and then you're going to see the various packages and configurations and whatnot you've included. Well, when I double click on this manifest file, what you would do is you would give your DBA everything in this deployment folder. So he double clicks on the manifest, and it comes up and says, well, how do I want to deploy this package? I can go to the file system or to SQL Server. If you go to the file system, it just puts something on the puts it in a file on the server, or you can actually insert it right into the database. So I'm going to say both of these will work. I'm just going to say go to the database. What server do you want to go to? Localhost. We'll use Windows authentication. Now for package path, if you come over here through SQL Server Management Studio, you can actually connect to your integration services server. And when you insert a package on the server, it puts it to what they call MSDB. And MSDB, by default, you have data collector and maintenance plans, but you can create new folders to hold your various packages. And I would advise you create a folder for each group of packages that you're inserting. So for this particular one, I just called it arcane code, but you could have done, probably a better name would have been DNR shows, and you create one for each of your applications. Now right now there's nothing in it. But after I come here and I say, well, where do I want to put it? I want to put it here in arcane code. And I've supplied the path, so I just click next. And it says, I'm going to put the packages in here into this folder is where I'm going to store them at. Am I ready to go? Boom. And it says, okay, I'm done. Everything went well. Have a nice life. So I come over here, and if I do a refresh, you can see I now have that package on my server. Okay. Well, now I need to be able to call that package from my .NET app. Unfortunately, I can't call the package directly, but there is a little workaround I can do. In SQL Server, I can go to SQL Server Agent, and this is probably something your DBA is going to do for you. He's probably not going to let you get your hands on his box. But under Jobs, I can come here, and I can go right-click, Add a new job, and I already got one set up here. When I added the new job, I gave it the name of Load DNR Shows, set myself up as the owner, and it has one step. When I added the step, and I just called the step name Run Package, under Type, I said, oh, you're a SQL Server Integration Services package. and I'm running it under the agent account. And you can see down here is I've said the package is that load DNR shows that I put up here. Okay, and I can actually come in here, for example, under data sources, I can override the connection string that I used. So I could connect up, I create this job once for my QA server, I create it again for the production server. Okay, so I've got these different things I can set up. There's all sorts of other things you can do, but for right now we'll just say OK. And OK. Now, as long as your SQL Server agent's running, which it is, that's a little tweak. Make sure your SQL Server agent's running by right-click and doing a start, because if you're doing this on your dev box, by default, it's not running. Okay, so, and it will fail, and you're going to scratch your head going, why? So that's your handy little tip. Don't forget to start up agent. Now within my package, my WinForms app, I can now do connection string, and then I can call this nifty little stored proc called start job, SP_ start job. Okay, and what that will do is we'll let you run that job you just created. Okay, so exec msdb, remember that's where I put it at, msdb.dbo.sp start job. Now, and then I gave it the name of the job, and it goes out and runs it. So let's look at that. Now remember, I still have the rows here, but I don't have them in here. Okay, still nothing in here yet. So now, when I actually launch this again, and I say execute the SSIS, it sends a one-way command to the server that says go and run the job. And then it immediately returns. When it returns, all it's done is said, I've issued the command. Okay, but it has not given you any kind of I've executed the command and it had no failure, but that doesn't mean your package ran okay. So you should probably, as one of the last steps of your package, put some code out there that your app can come back and check to say, hey, did it run successfully or not? Okay. But I've executed the package, and now if we come back over here, you can see I now have data. Okay. And like it should have, I've deleted it out of here. Now, this is a real simple example of something to do, but imagine if you had a huge number of rows you had to process. Okay, you could easily get them up on the server and do a lot of processing there, especially in a situation where, like if you had a whole lot of lookups to do, okay, now all of a sudden this becomes really powerful because you're doing all the lookups on the server and you're not having to bring all that data back to your wherever your workstation, wherever your .NET app's running at. Okay, so that's where the real power of this comes in, and that's where you'll pick up a huge speed improvement in your data processing. Now, one other thing I'll mention, start job is extremely powerful in terms of the database, and odds are, if you say, yeah, I want to do this, your DBA is going to go, oh, not on my server, you're not. Okay, so the solution that I generally tell people is create a stored procedure that explicitly calls that job and only that one job, and then have the DBA give you execute privileges on that stored proc. That way, you can't execute just any job on the server. You can only execute that one job. Okay, and that's something I've worked with DBAs in the past who said, yeah, okay, I can live with that. Okay, so if you get a stickler, that's a good way to handle it. Okay, a few last slides because we've got about 5 minutes left. Hopefully you've gotten through this and you've said, hey, I want to learn more about SSIS. Okay. These two guys, Eric Bierman and Brian Knight, know just about everything in SSIS there is to know. And these are some of their books. If you see, my standard policy is if I see a book with one of their names on it, I just buy it. Okay. So I always learn something.
Rated A for awesome.
pressing the semicolon pretty much anywhere inside the line, and it knows, CodeRush knows that, well, you just mean you're done, and the cursor jumps at the end, the semicolon gets put in the C#, and then I can just keep on typing. I don't have to arrow. I mean, I just get tired of typing the arrow key. Rename. I mean, how can you not love rename? When I don't have CodeRush, or if I'm pairing with someone who doesn't have CodeRush, and it feels like my hands are bound because I see them using maybe the built-in Visual Studio features, and they work, but they're not CodeRush. I was pairing with a junior dev, really sharp guy, he knows his stuff, but he's not used to CodeRush. He hit the Visual Studio rename button, and this dialogue pops up. It took like 2 or 3 seconds for it to pop up, and like my time is more valuable to me than that 2 or 3 seconds. So I said, no, what are you doing? I hit escape a couple times. I said, watch how fast this is. Hit the refactor key, rename, done. I had the whole thing, the whole rename refactoring done faster than it took the Visual Studio dialog for rename to pop up.
How the performance is great, how the UI is great. I mean, just everything about it is really just feels like it's really gelled, right? And it's a real high quality product. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. I can't get enough of it. It's awesome.
CodeRush has been on the list since forever. I mean, I'm all about the CodeRush.
This extract method, it's awesome. It's so fast that you can sort of hit the refactor key for extract method, and the preview shows you like, oh, this is what it's going to look like. And then if it's not what I want, you know, I just hit escape, maybe sort of highlight different text and say, oh, that's really what I wanted to extract as my method.
We saw the parameter reordering, and I said, come on, you guys, quick, look over here. And then we took 2 parameters and we went like this, and then the inside of the editor, the 2 parameters like jumped up, ran away, and flipped over, and like people just went, oh! It was like an MTV. It was like an Ashton Kutcher kind of a You Got Punk thing, except with developers. And they just went bonkers. They could not believe that that kind of thing could happen.
I was kind of against third-party tools, but I found DevExpress very easy to work with.
And based on our previous experience with Delphi and a lot of different component vendors, DevExpress is a natural fit.
Easy to use. Our end users love its functionality. It's extremely easy for them to understand. It's just very intuitive, not only from the end user standpoint, but our developers, if we bring a developer online, putting them in touch with the utilization of that grid in a new control is a piece of cake. You're very consistent across all your controls. I understand the properties intuitively. Once I learn one, I will be able to transfer that to others. It's just a very clear development underpinning that helps me a lot as a developer. One of the first things that I got back was when we used the pivot grid, and I sent it out to some people who do business analysis, and they had never actually been able to grab data in that way, take it, look at it, shred it, and they were just kind of overwhelmed. I would encourage anyone who's using development, WinForms or web forms, who needs grids and common controls, take a look at this stuff. I think you'll find it's amazing.
You know, everybody that we talk to, we tell about DevExpress. It has fundamentally changed our software. We were pretty limited with the Windows controls. And we were afraid to put our software in a position where we had to depend on another vendor. I spent a lot of time reviewing DevExpress, and I was really pleased with what I found. We looked at the website, we looked at the testimonials, we looked at the examples, and we knew that DevExpress was going to be a rock-solid company. And we felt comfortable with basing the success of our software as a partnership with the control vendor. In TechEd, one year we saw the scheduler control, and I had a note on my desk that said maybe we can use this for the software. It turns out that we use the grid, the vertical grid, all the lookup edits. We inherit our own edits. We make a lot of use of the scheduling controls, the reporting controls. I mean, we pretty much live and die by DevExpress.